Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Jorge Rojas White Honey Processed Colombia from September Coffee Company. And there's the bag right there. And September, based out of Ottawa, Ontario. And before we start, a quick bit of housekeeping notes, as the bag has this one listed as semi-washed, while the website has it listed as a white honey processed coffee. So for intents and purposes of this review, we will go with what is listed on September's website and call this one a white honey processed Colombian coffee. But September is a coffee roaster that has appeared on this channel on numerous occasions over the years, and much more recently in the last few months, as they've offered a number of coffees that have caught my interest. This one included, as it mostly caught my interest due to the fact that it just sounds like my type of coffee. So it'll be interesting to see how it turned out, as this right here is day 77. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe, in a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit, and I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee. This one is another one of September's extra light offerings, and you can certainly tell that it's used pretty heavily on the light side of things. I would say the only coffee that I've had from them in the past that felt a little lighter than this one was the Raul Perez, which felt exceptionally light. Even then, this coffee is still very light by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 45. First impression, and we did opt for the V60, and the coffee had a very nice level of intensity given that it does have the extra light profile to it. And to put that in context, there have been some coffees that we've had from them in the past, most notably thinking of the Jose Gijon and Francisco Ventimilla, that didn't open up to this level of intensity until maybe even 30 days after we had reviewed that coffee itself. So having this coffee offer this much intensity right off the bat, especially given the profile of it, was certainly very surprising. The sweetness did shine throughout, as it's presented very early on in a candied fruit sense that was very much in line with the listed Starburst. It was just notably sweet from that first impression, so it definitely left a very positive first impression. Day 48. Through the Chemex, and the coffee is even better this time around, as it's increased in the overall clarity and intensity, offering an almost strawberry banana jello-like feel in terms of the sugariness, but also in terms of the overall sweetness. Florality, a secondary component, but the cup in general is just very sweet. So once again, another positive experience from this coffee. We move on to day 51 as we opted for the April brewer, and the coffee itself just continues to yield a very wild level of sweetness and intensity, reminiscent of the previously mentioned strawberry banana jello, and I would even describe it as maybe like a strawberry banana smoothie, as it just has that much intensity and sweetness to it. Florality continues to remain present, but the coffee just offers intense fruit sweetness throughout. We move on to day 54 as we opted for the V60 with some higher temperatures and a more fine grind. And interestingly enough, the coffee is the least impressive it has been to this point, as it felt just a slight bit more uneven, so we might have pushed it a little far, as the brightness is a bit higher and it seems to take away from the earlier prominent sweetness, as it still has that unique banana-like sugariness to it, but with a much more lingering floral sense to it. So it did kind of balance out, I guess you could say, the sweetness by offering it maybe a little bit more depth, but given just how much I was enjoying the sweetness of this coffee, it's not something I really wanted to sacrifice too much. We move on to day 57 as we opted for the Chemex with the same adjustments, and it was nice yet again, but perhaps the least impressive it had been to this point, as it did require an extended cool down before it opened up, as it was pretty faint off brew. Sweeter strawberry banana-like feel to it yet again, and the note they have listed on here I think was something like pink starburst, which makes a lot of sense why we were experiencing that kind of very strawberry banana sugariness to it. Day 60 through the V60 with our standard recipe, and the last few brews of this coffee have been more toned down relative to some of the earlier days, as it's offering a slight bit less sweetness and intensity. But given that this coffee opened up with such tremendous sweetness and intensity, I was going to be pretty surprised if I didn't maybe even adapt to just how intense it was, as it's still mostly fruit forward with a lingering honeysuckle-like aspect. Day 63. Through the Chemex with our standard recipe, and the coffee has had a slight bit of a resurgence with this brew method, and that's why I opted to go with this brew method. Rarely do I have a coffee that is so notably better through one brew method than the other, but for whatever reason, that seems to be the case with this coffee, as it's the best it's been to this point. Tremendous intensity and sweetness, it's all been back. Coffee has been slightly inconsistent in that regard, but the honeysuckle is a bit better defined this time around, with a strong tropical sugary sweetness yet again. And I feel like the Chemex really seemed to accentuate a lot of the the clarity in this one, as that's usually what it offers and why at times I do like to use it, because it does allow me to taste a little bit more of the coffee at times, and that certainly happened with this one, as it just seemed to really hone in on the definition of this coffee. And on day 66, we opted for the Chemex with our standard recipe one more time, and it continues to perform well above expectations, as it's clean, defined, to score a very high mark in terms of the artificial sugary banana strawberry smoothie feel to it, with a very sweet honeysuckle-like aspect to it. I should note some other things. While this coffee was very heavy in those specific aspects, it did offer a slight bergamot, as this coffee was just very clean, and that's the citric quality that I picked up from it. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have 4 level 5s, so let's go through those. And we will start with the sweetness level 5. And the reason why I want to start with that is because that actually defines this coffee. This coffee is just hyper sweet, and I think they had something listed on their website saying that it was a very sweet coffee, but it's one thing to say a coffee is very sweet. There have been coffees that have said very sweet in the past, and they've scored a level 3 for sweetness. But this one, on the other hand, is perhaps the sweetest non-natural processed Colombian, or I guess more processed Colombian coffee that we've ever reviewed. So maybe take away the Bermuda's coffees, and this one might be the sweetest Colombian coffee we've ever reviewed. Level 5 is where we scored it. This is one of those coffees where I could easily score the level 6. And it's going to be interesting when we discuss the rest of the notes in this one, but level 5 for the sweetness on this one, most certainly. Florality, level 5, and even with the honeysuckle being notably more toned down relative to the other aspect of this coffee, it still scored a level 5 because that's just how intense this coffee was. So level 5 for florality and that honeysuckle-like sense, I'm happy to have it there because I think it's more than justified. Berry fruit, level 5, and it's going to be very important when we discuss the final level 5 that we have in this one, but yes, I can definitely see that strawberry starburst. It does have an artificial sugariness to it, and I continue to line it with that strawberry banana jello, that strawberry banana smoothie, because it just has that very sugary aspect of what you would expect from a banana, while at the same time having that artificial strawberry feel to it, and it's just so strong and intense that it's also justified there at the level 5. But here we're going to move over to the most important thing in this entire tasting wheel. The cleanliness is at a level 5. This coffee is extremely well defined. It's extremely clean. It's presented in such a clean manner that you're able to experience all of these factors in just notable definition to it. So oftentimes those things can be too overbearing, like a sweetness at a level 5 and the berry fruit especially at a level 5. But when you couple that with the cleanliness at that level 5, it more than makes up for it. That is by far the most important factor in this tasting wheel, because without that cleanliness there at the level 5, all of the rest of the things aren't anywhere near as good as they are, but given that it's there, it justifies everything else. So you can put almost anything in this tasting wheel at a level 5 once you put the cleanliness there at a level 5, and you have a very impressive cup of coffee, maybe with the exception of something like spice or smokiness. But let's go ahead and move on to the level 4s. We'll start with the finish, level 4. For all of the praise that I bestowed upon this coffee, it does have a much more even finish to it, which I'm more than happy with, given that I don't necessarily want these things to be too overbearing. There are certainly coffees we've had that have skewed in that direction, but this one right here has a nice, clean, even finish to it, so I'm very happy with it there. Citrus fruit, level 4. Even with the bergamot being a little bit more of an afterthought within this coffee, it's there towards the very end, and it's something that we notated within this tasting wheel. But a level 4 relative to these notes that are essentially level 6s, it's prominent, but not to the same extent as all of the other qualities are within this coffee. A couple of level 3s. We'll start with the brightness, level 3, and I feel like you could possibly get a fair bit more brightness out of this coffee if you really push it, as was the case with some of the experiences that we had with this one. But I was fine with it being there at that level 3, mostly because it was just skewing a lot more in directions that I was really looking for within this coffee, especially given that it felt like sacrificing the clarity ever so slightly and the overall just skewed direction of this tasting wheel. So level 3 is where we put it. We move on to, is that the only... Well, we have a couple of other level 3s. Caramel level 3, that's exclusively the candied aspect of this one, and given that they have that starburst note list on here and it's so candied sweet that it justifies that level 3 mark, as you could probably bump that up, but I felt like it's not really caramel, it's just much more of that candied sense, so level 3 is where we put it. Savoriness, level 3. I completely forgot that they have an Earl Grey note listed on here, and every time I drink this coffee, I completely forget that that's one of the other notes that they have listed on here, and funny enough, I think it's the first note that they have listed on this coffee. But compared to the other qualities within this one, it's most certainly an afterthought for me. I feel it ever so slightly, and it's defined, but at the same time, the other factors within this coffee are just much more abundant than this one. And then final thing worth discussing, body level 3, which is very interesting to me given once again it is brewed with the Chemex. It is a Gesha, so on paper in theory it should be a lot lower than that, but it had plenty of texture and body to it as well, so it justified itself scoring that level 3 mark, which does make for a very interesting looking tasting wheel. I can't quite recall any coffees that have maybe looked similar to this, but as I am looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I have heard a fair bit of feedback about this one as people that tried it for the first time were just really impressed by how much intensity and sweetness there was to it, which was in line with my own experiences. So I've already heard a lot of positive feedback about this coffee, and it is a little strange that this coffee did turn out as good as it did. And I did reach out to Kyle because I was kind of curious if maybe there's some additional processing. When it comes to Colombian coffees, you always have to wonder, because I think it's a compliment to say that this coffee was just that good that I was skeptical that a coffee could actually turn out this sweet and clean, because there are coffees that are this sweet and clean, but usually there's something more to it. And I was just kind of curious to see if there was anything else, but if this coffee is pure in the sense that it is, like there was no alteration to it and this coffee just turned out as good as it did, that's really impressive. And if there was some sort of alteration to this coffee, which there could have been, I'm not making any accusations, I really don't know any better. It's just genuinely a compliment that this coffee did turn out as good as it did. And I'm just kind of confused because in the past, I want to say pre-2020, there weren't coffees that tasted this good for being this clean and this sweet. So it's impressive, and I think it's by far my favorite September coffee that we've ever reviewed, mostly because it skews heavily in everything that I'm looking for. It's very clean, it's very floral, it's very sweet, and it's very fruit forward. All of those things scored a level 5, and for that reason, it is one of my favorite Colombian coffees that we have reviewed on this channel as well. So I'm just really impressed by this one. I know a lot of people were impressed by this one, and I want to give the producer as well as September massive props for this coffee, as I find it to be a very interesting coffee and a very unique coffee, all things that I'm looking for in general. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, first place I want to start is the sweetness. If you like your hyper sweet coffees as I do, then I think that this one's a great fit. Couple that with the fact that it's just exceptionally clean. Those two things I feel like are a selling point for a majority of people, and couple that with the fact that it does have that lighter profile. And in addition to that, plenty of florality and plenty of fruit components, and you have yourself a real gem in terms of the aspects that a lot of people that prefer their wash processed coffees look for. Granted, this one is technically not a wash processed coffee, but it certainly acts like a wash processed coffee with a great bit of intensity. So that's the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here is my review of the Jorge Rojas White Honey Processed Colombia from September Coffee Company. Thank you for watching.